I believe most veterans lose their sleep apnea claims not because they don't deserve them, but because no one ever sat down and showed them how to fight the right way. The VA system doesn't just hand out approvals, it demands proof, precision, and persistence. In sleep apnea, it's one of the most denied VA disability claims out there. But here's what no one tells you the reason most veterans lose these claims isn't because they lack a diagnosis, it's because they lack strategy. You've probably heard a version of this story before. A veteran finally gets diagnosed with sleep apnea after years of snoring, choking, and dragging through the day exhausted. They file their VA claim thinking, well, I've got a study, I've got CPAP, so I must be good. And then the white envelope shows up in their mailbox, says denied. They start doubting themselves. They start thinking maybe it's hopeless. Maybe it's not connected. Maybe the system's just broken. But the truth, you can win these claims if you understand how the VA thinks about them. And that's exactly what we're doing today. We're going to unpack why these claims get denied, how to build the perfect one from the ground up, and what's about to change in 2025 that could permanently reduce your benefits if you don't act soon. Because this isn't just about compensation. This is about reclaiming your health, your energy, and your peace of mind, and your right to breathe again. All right, so grab a notebook and stay with me. All right, so here's something most veterans don't realize. Over 500,000 veterans are service connected for sleep apnea just today. That's good, but it also means that millions more who suffer from the same condition are not connected. So every week I meet veterans who can't get through a single night without using their CPAP machine, who've got a documented sleep study, daytime hypersomnolence, and years of VA treatment notes, and still their claims get denied. And I'll tell you exactly why. Because the VA doesn't care what you have, they care why you have it. If the evidence doesn't clearly connect your sleep apnea to your service or to an already service-connected condition, say like PTSD, GERD, rhinitis, or chronic pain, the VA labels it as random. And random doesn't get you benefits. Let me give you an example. One veteran I met, we'll call him John, served multiple deployments in Afghanistan. He worked around burn pits, inhaled toxic fumes, and lived on about 3 hours of sleep a night for months at a time. Years later, he was diagnosed with obstructive sleep apnea. He was exhausted, struggling to stay awake at work, and snapping at his family from pure fatigue. But his VA claim was denied. Why? Because there wasn't a single note in his treatment service records saying the word sleep apnea. See, the VA doesn't look at the full story. They look at check boxes. No diagnosis in service? Denied. No nexus? Denied. No medical opinion explaining the connection between PTSD and your sleep apnea? Denied. But here's what they don't tell you. You don't need a sleep apnea diagnosis while you were in uniform to get service connected. You just need to prove that it is at least as likely as not connected to something you're already service connected for. That's where the nexus comes in. And it's the most critical part of your claim. It's the single document that tells the VA, this isn't random, this is connected, this is service related. But without that, you're invisible to the system. But with it, you've got a fighting chance to win, even if you've been denied before. It doesn't matter once, twice, or 3 times before. And that's what this video is all about. This is the playbook I wish someone had given me years ago, a step-by-step guide for veterans who are tired of being told no and ready to build the strongest claim possible for their sleep apnea claim. Let's talk about what's really at stake here. If you learn to build your claim the right way, and if you don't do it the right way, you're not just missing out on a few $100s a month. You're missing out on a lifetime of care, security for your family, and the benefits you earn through your service. Let's put that into some perspective, right? So that's 50% rating for sleep apnea. Right now, that's roughly $1,200 a month, tax-free. Over 10 years, that adds up. That's more than $144,000 in compensation. That money doesn't just help with bills. It helps with medication, gas to get to appointments, therapy for your PTSD, braces for your kids, food on the table. Now imagine losing that because of a paperwork technicality, because your claim didn't have a clear nexus statement, because someone didn't phrase one sentence correctly in your DBQ. That's what happens every single day. And here's where things get really urgent. The VA is changing how it rates sleep apnea altogether in 2025. And these changes will affect everyone. The automatic 50% rating for using a CPAP machine is now gone. The 30% category completely eliminated. Under the new rules, you could have a documented diagnosis, use your CPAP faithfully every night, and still only qualify for 10%. Why? Because the VA will argue that your symptoms are fully managed by treatment. You're not disabled, you're just treated. That means the same machine that once qualified you for benefits could now disqualify you from them. And here's the real kicker. If you're already rated for sleep apnea, but you file a claim or review after the changes go into effect, the VA can apply the new criteria to your case. So if your claim isn't filed and documented before this change, you could lose tens of thousands of dollars over your lifetime. But it's not just about the money. It's also about everything that comes with that service, right? And that service connection. So you get lifetime VA healthcare eligibility, your dependents protection and survivor benefits, your DIC, eligibility for secondary claims like hypertension, heart disease, diabetes, even depression and fatigue secondary to sleep apnea. Once you've service connected sleep apnea, you open the door to all of those. But if you're not, you're shut out completely. Think about it this way. You spent years in environments that wrecked your sleep. Sandstorms, flight lines, barracks noise, shift rotations, toxic smoke, even stress. You came home and your body never really recovered. You wake up gasping for air, you fight through the day exhausted, you fall asleep at red lights, and then the VA tells you, sorry, we don't see the connection. That's not acceptable. So here's the bottom line. This isn't just about a claim. It's about protecting your future. You've got a limited window before these new rating changes go into full effect. You can either prepare, file it right, and lock in your compensation under the current system, or you can wait and risk losing 80 to 90% of your benefit value forever. That's the difference between securing your financial freedom or watching you slip away because no one told you the clock was ticking. This is why I do what I do, because I've seen veterans go from complete denial to a full approval just because someone finally showed them how to fight smart. And that's exactly what I'm going to teach you next. I want to tell you about Mike. All right, he was a Marine veteran I worked with a long time ago. He's one of those guys who checks every box for what we call a combat-tested warrior. He was tough, humble, and the last person to ever complain about anything. Mike served on multiple tours in Iraq. He lived off adrenaline and caffeine, like most of us, and he had nights filled with the sound of generators, helicopters, and distant explosions. His sleep was really never peaceful. He'd wake up choking on dust, coughing from burn pit smoke, sometimes going 2 or 3 days at a time without real rest at all. When he came home, he told himself the nightmares and exhaustion were just part of the deal. But over time, things got progressively worse. His wife started noticing things. Loud snoring, gasping for air. Sometimes she'd wake up in the middle of the night because he'd stopped breathing entirely. He'd jolt awake, heart racing, drenched in sweat. By day, he was irritable, foggy, and falling asleep at stoplights. He thought it was just the PTSD, until a sleep study confirmed the real culprit: severe obstructive sleep apnea. Now here's where the story takes a turn. Mike did everything right. He got the diagnosis, he filed the VA claim, and he got denied twice. Why? Because there was nothing in his service treatment records that said the word sleep apnea. No CPAP prescription from Iraq, no note from a medic, no checkbox that said difficulty sleeping. And that right there, that's where most veterans give up. But Mike didn't. Instead, he called me. We went through everything: his service records, medical notes, buddy statements, and what we found was something very powerful. He didn't have a diagnosis in service, but he did have patterns that pointed to it. He had chronic rhinitis and sinus infections documented after exposure to sand and burn pits. He had PTSD that had been worsening his sleep for years. And his spouse statement described exactly what the VA calls apneic episodes. Those are those pauses in breathing followed by choking or gasping. This was the missing puzzle piece. So we built this case the right way. We got a nexus letter from a physician that connected the dots between his service-connected rhinitis, PTSD, and his current diagnosis of sleep apnea. We backed it with medical literature showing how nasal obstruction and chronic stress physiology increases the risk for sleep apnea. And we included that spouse statement as lay evidence, describing those nights in vivid human detail. When the VA reviewed it, they didn't just see another sleep apnea claim. They saw a complete, evidence-based picture of how military service led directly to this condition. That combination changed everything. His claim was approved at 50%, and his back pay covered nearly 4 years of benefits. But more importantly, Mike told me something I'll never forget. He said, for the first time in years, I feel like someone actually believed me. That's what this is really about. Again, it's not just paperwork, it's proof of your story. It's about taking years of silent suffering and finally putting it into the language the VA can't ignore anymore. And Mike's case is not rare. It's the blueprint. If you've got a sleep study, a service-connected condition, and people who can testify to your symptoms, you can win too, even if your service records are silent, even if you've been denied before, because the VA doesn't require perfection. It requires proof with purpose. And when you know how to present that proof, you can change your outcome just like Mike did. So let's break this all down. If you've ever been denied for sleep apnea, or you're thinking about filing, you're about to learn the exact framework we use here at Xterra Health to help veterans win these claims. So let's talk about understanding sleep apnea first. Sleep apnea isn't just snoring. It's a physiological disruption where your breathing actually stops and starts repeatedly during your sleep. It'll deprive your body and your brain of oxygen. So there are really three types of sleep apnea. There's the most common, which is obstructive sleep apnea, where your throat muscles relax and block airway flow. Central sleep apnea, where the brain fails to put out the right signals to breathe. And then you've got mixed, which is a combination of both obstructive and central sleep apnea. In veterans, sleep apnea is by far very common and is deeply linked to military service conditions. We're talking burn pits, poor sleeping environments, chronic stress, PTSD, weight changes, and medication side effects. Listen, a 2024 study in sleep health found that 21% of veterans actually have sleep apnea, more than double the civilian rate. Army veterans top the list, followed by Air Force and Navy. And when you factor in PTSD, TBI, or GERD, your risk skyrockets even more. So how does the VA rate sleep apnea? Well, the VA uses diagnostic code 6847 under the CFR 38 to assign disability ratings from either 0% to 100%. And here's the breakdown. 100% is for chronic respiratory failure, cor pulmonale, or a tracheostomy, a breathing tube in your neck. 50% is use of CPAP or any other breathing assistant device. 30% is for persistent daytime hypersomnolence or sleepiness. And 0% is if you're asymptomatic, meaning you have no symptoms, but you have documented disordered breathing. So for years, the 50% CPAP rating was the bread and butter. But under the new rules that are coming, you're only going to qualify if treatment is ineffective or incomplete. So if your CPAP fully resolves your apnea, they'll likely drop it to 10%. That's why filing before the change matters. Now, let's get into how to actually win your claim and talk strategy. The mission-ready blueprint for winning a sleep apnea claim. Step 1, you got to get a formal diagnosis with a sleep study. The VA will not recognize your claim without an official sleep study. That is your foundation. Without it, the claim dies before it can even start. If you don't have one, ask your provider or get it privately. Document your AHI score, your oxygen desaturation levels, and any prescribed treatments. If you don't have a recent sleep study or you don't know if yours meets the VA criteria, click on the link in the description for a free medical consultation. We'll actually review your records and identify the gaps and tell you exactly what you need to do next. Step 2, you've got to understand direct versus secondary service connection. There are two paths to victory. Direct service connection means your sleep apnea started in service, so you'll actually need service trip records, in-service symptoms, or buddy statements, but most veterans don't have that because the diagnosis often comes later, years later. So secondary service connection is where most veterans went. That's when your sleep apnea is caused or aggravated by another service-connected condition like PTSD, GERD, rhinitis, sinusitis, TBI, or even chronic pain and obesity from orthopedic injuries. So here are some examples. PTSD leading to disrupted sleep patterns and hyperarousal, which leads to sleep apnea. You've got rhinitis and sinusitis, which lead to nasal obstruction and then airway restriction, sleep apnea. You've got GERD, which leads to reflux in your airway, inflammation, you can't wear the mask, and that's aggravation of your sleep apnea. So the next thing I really want to talk about is the purpose of a nexus letter, which is often needed in these claims, and it's often the linchpin to actually win these cases. A nexus letter is not just another piece of paperwork. It's a medical bridge connecting the dots between your military service and your already service-connected conditions, all right? Or one of your already service-connected current diagnoses. It's what transforms your story from this veteran has sleep apnea into this veteran has sleep apnea because of his military service. That word, because, is everything. You could have the best sleep study in the world. You could have a CPAP machine. You could even have treatment records going back years. But if there's no medical opinion explaining why it's connected to your service, the VA will almost always deny it because in their eyes, correlation is not causation. The next letter is what proves causation. Now let's talk about what makes a nexus letter powerful. A good nexus letter isn't emotional. It's clinical, logical, and evidence-based. Here's what it should include line by line: the doctor's credentials. The VA gives more weight to medical opinions from licensed physicians, particularly those familiar with the condition in question. So if your next letter comes from a board-certified sleep specialist, ENT, pulmonologist, or internal medicine physician, it carries serious weight. But even a family doctor or a primary care physician or nurse practitioner can write a strong one if it's well supported. Two, you got to have a clear medical opinion using the VA's own language. This is critical. The exact phrase the VA always looks for is, "it is at least as likely as not," which is essentially 50% or greater probability that the veteran's sleep apnea was caused or aggravated by whatever condition they're trying to connect it to. Those words, "at least as likely as not," are the magic key that tells the rater this opinion meets the legal standard for service connection. Three, you got to have a well-reasoned medical rationale. The doctor or medical writer can't just say, "I think it's related." They need to show their work. So for example, if they're linking sleep apnea to PTSD, explain how chronic hyperarousal disrupts your REM sleep cycles, increases airway tension, and promotes weight gain. All these are risk factors for sleep apnea. If linking sleep apnea to rhinitis or sinusitis, explain how chronic nasal inflammation causes airflow restriction during sleep. And if you're linking sleep apnea through obesity as an intermediate step, cite evidence that weight gain secondary to chronic pain or medication from mental health diseases increases the risk of airway collapse and weight gain. The VA raters are trained to look for this type of logical chain. The service to the condition, the mechanism to the outcome. That's what transforms a claim from weak to bulletproof. Number four, you've got to have references to your medical literature. This isn't required, but it's one of the best ways to strengthen your case. When a physician or medical provider cites peer-reviewed research, for example, studies in the Journal of Clinical Sleep Medicine and Sleep Health, they show a significant correlation between PTSD and sleep apnea prevalence in veterans, it gives your claim more credibility. It tells the rater this isn't just an opinion, it's backed by real science. And five, you got to have evidence-based reasoning. The medical provider should directly tie your claim and your medical records, service history, and symptoms to the opinion. For example, they would say something like, "Veteran service treatment records document chronic sinus infections and nasal congestion after burn pit exposure in Iraq from 2007 to 2008. These symptoms are consistent with upper airway inflammation contributing to the development of obstructive sleep apnea diagnosed in 2016. That is what we call causal continuity, the logical connection from cause to effect. I've seen one strong nexus letter completely reverse a denial that's been sitting for years. Literally, one well-written, well-supported letter that finally made the VA connect the dots. Because when the right medical provider puts their name and credentials behind your claim, and when that letter is grounded in both your records and medical science, it becomes undeniable. And let me be real with you, not all nexus letters are created equal. A generic one, maybe a generic one paragraph note that says veteran has sleep apnea related to service, will hurt your claim more than it helps it. The VA sees right through those templated letters. What you want is a detailed, customized opinion that addresses your unique service story, your exposures, your symptoms, your current diagnosis. That's what makes it credible. If your medical provider doesn't feel comfortable writing one, that's okay. There are physicians and medical providers who specialize in VA nexus opinions. And we understand that at Xterra Health here, we understand both the medical side and the legal side of what the VA requires. And here's the truth. A strong nexus letter can single-handedly overturn a denial. It can turn a no into a yes. It can change the entire trajectory of your benefits, your healthcare, and your family's future. So if you're watching this and you're not sure if your nexus letter is strong enough, or you've been denied in the past and don't have one yet, don't guess anymore. Click the link in the description below. Here at Xterra Health, we will review your records, match you with a licensed medical provider who understands VA standards, and make sure your nexus letter hits every requirement to give you the best shot at approval. Because this one document, done right, can be the difference between a lifetime of frustration and a lifetime of benefits. Next, step 4, you've got to file a DBQ, which is a disability benefits questionnaire. So the DBQ, or disability benefits questionnaire, is one of the most overlooked tools in the entire VA claims process, but it's also one of the most powerful. Think of the DBQ as the VA's blueprint for rating your condition. It's a standardized medical form created by the VA itself that tells raters exactly what clinical evidence they need to assign the proper percentage. When you submit a DBQ completed by a qualified medical provider, you're giving the VA everything it needs: the diagnosis, the symptoms, the test results, and your functional limitations in their own language. That means less guesswork, fewer delays, and a much smaller chance you'll be scheduled for an unnecessary C&P exam. So here's why it matters. The DBQ, it standardizes your medical evidence. The VA rater can compare your DBQ line by line with their rating criteria in the CFR 38 for sleep apnea. It validates your current condition. So the DBQ documents the severity of your sleep apnea, your AHI score, and whether a CPAP or other device is required. All the data points the VA uses to assign that 0%, 30%, 50%, or 100% rating. It will complement your nexus letter. The next letter explains the why your condition is service-connected, but the DBQ shows how severe it is today. Together, they create a decision-ready claim that can be submitted and approved on the first review. If you're filing for sleep apnea, make sure your DBQ includes your formal sleep study results, the date, include the AHI, oxygen saturation, treatment notes, include any prescribed CPAP or BiPAP therapy in response to that treatment, include the symptoms, such as daytime fatigue, hypersomnolence, morning headaches, and concentration issues, and then include any comments or on whether the condition affects your employment, your functional status, or daily functioning at all. When your DBQ and nexus letter arrive as a complete package, it will tell the VA that this veteran's claim is fully documented, medically verified, and ready for rating. That's how you eliminate bottlenecks, you shorten processing times, and sometimes, yes, even bypass a C&P exam altogether. I have seen it. Step 5, use lay evidence. Here's one of the biggest mistakes I see veterans make. They underestimate the power of lay evidence. Statements from the people who've lived this with you, such as your spouse, a roommate, or a battle buddy that has seen you choking, gasping, snoring, or stopping breathing in your sleep. Those observations can carry real weight with the VA. Remember, the VA rates based on evidence, not assumptions. But the VA also knows that service treatment records don't always tell the whole story. We weren't getting full sleep studies downrange. Most of us are grabbing 2 hours of rack time between missions, not running to the medic to say, hey, I stopped breathing in my sleep last night. Can you document it? That's where lay evidence bridges the gap. So what does this look like? So it could be a spouse statement detailing years of loud snoring, gasping for air, or you stopping breathing in the middle of the night. It could be a roommate from the barracks or a battle buddy recalling how you always were exhausted at formation and would fall asleep sitting up. It could be a fellow service member writing that, they remembered you choking in your sleep at night or falling asleep on convoy because you never got real rest. That is what the VA calls competent and credible lay evidence. It can prove that your symptoms began during or right after service, even when your records don't spell it out. Here's a quick tip. Have your lay witness whoever that's going to be, write in plain language. Include the dates, the locations, specific details, and keep it real. Like, he snored loud every night in our tent inclusion in 2007, and I'd shake him because he kept stopping breathing. That one sentence can tell the VA volumes. Lay evidence is often the difference between a denial and an approval, especially for conditions like sleep apnea that can go undiagnosed for years. So don't skip it. Build your case like a story. Medical records show the diagnosis, nexus letters show the connection, and lay evidence shows the human truth that ties it all together. Step 6, this is a hard one, but you need to anticipate a denial and be ready for your next steps. Even the strongest claims get denied. I know that hurts to hear, but denial isn't defeat. It's usually feedback. When you get that letter in the mail, it doesn't mean you were wrong. It means the VA didn't see the connection clearly enough. Your job is to make it unmistakable, undeniable. You've got 3 paths forward at this point, right? So you can do a higher level review, otherwise known as an HLR. It's where a senior VA rater takes a fresh look at your claim. So you can't submit any new evidence, but you have a chance to point out errors in the original decision. Maybe they misread your sleep study, ignored your nexus letter altogether, or under-evaluated your symptoms. So you can even request an informal conference to verbally explain why the decision was wrong. Sometimes that alone, that informal decision-making process, gets things fixed. Your next option is to do another supplemental claim. Here's where you bring in new and relevant evidence. That might mean a rebuttal letter, a stronger nexus letter, a recent DBQ, new buddy statements, or medical literature that the VA didn't consider before. The VA is required by law to look at anything new you submit that adds clarity to your claim. If you were missing the link last time, this is your chance to close it out. And number 3, your last option is, the big guns, Board of Veterans Appeals, or as we like to call it, the board. If you've been denied multiple times and your evidence is rock solid, this is usually where you have to go next. A veterans law judge will review your case and make a final decision. Yes, it does take longer, but many veterans win right here because the board can see what regional raters missed. So, let me give you a real world example. So there's a Gulf War veteran I worked with that was denied twice for sleep apnea. He had no service true records that showed anything about sleep issues, nothing at all. But we built his appeal on new evidence, a strong nexus letter linking his sleep apnea to burn pit exposure, chronic rhinitis. We had lay statements from 2 soldiers who slept next to him in Iraq. And we had peer-reviewed studies linking organic solvent exposure to sleep disorders. That combination, medical proof, lay evidence, and science, was undeniable. He won on appeal and locked in a 50% rating with years of back pay. So here's my take and my message to anyone. Don't quit. Don't let one denial define your story. Every appeal is another chance to tell it better with stronger evidence and clearer connections. The VA system can be slow, but it isn't impossible, especially when you approach it like a mission. So gather your intel or your records, build your strategy, which is your next letter in DBQ, and execute your appeal with precision, because the only way to lose for sure is to stop fighting. So I want to get into a little bit of advanced strategies, some things that maybe you're not thinking about. So this is where we talk about where the advanced cases are won, the ones most veterans never even think to build, because by this point, you already know the basics. You got the diagnosis, what a nexus is, what a DBQ is, and what lay evidence is. But if you really want to build a claim that stands up to scrutiny and wins on appeal, you got to start playing chess, not checkers. So what about toxic exposure claims? For veterans of Iraq, Afghanistan, or even earlier conflicts, burn pit exposure was a constant reality. Diesel, jet fuel, trash, medical waste, plastics, all burning. Those particles don't just disappear. They scar the airway and create chronic inflammation that can lead to obstructive sleep apnea. If you serve near open air burn pits or in environments with chemical inhalants like paint, solvents, hydraulic fluid, even weapons cleaner, your claim can connect sleep apnea as a toxic exposure secondary condition. So to prove it, you've got to provide those deployment records, typically your DD-214, any environmental hazard sheets, or statements showing proximity to burn pits or fumes. You need to take a nexus letter explaining how chronic inhalation caused upper airway inflammation and scar tissue leading to airway collapse during sleep. And then you want to reference some of the current literature out there. There's multiple VA and NIH-funded studies that now recognize that particulate exposures increase long-term risk for sleep apnea and chronic bronchitis. If you have sinusitis or rhinitis or asthma already service-connected, due it to exposure. That's your bridge. You link the toxic exposure condition to chronic nasal inflammation to sleep apnea. That's how you turn an impossible claim into a winnable one. This is one we hear a lot, obesity acting as an intermediate step. This one can be a game changer, and it's perfectly legal under, this is a long one, VAOPGCPREC 1-2017. That's a mouthful, but it is the General Counsel's precedent opinion. It says obesity can serve as an intermediate step between two conditions. So, if your PTSD, depression, or chronic orthopedic pain led to weight gain, and that weight gain therefore contributed to your sleep apnea, you can still get service connected. Here's the logic chain. So you've got a service connected condition like PTSD, which leads to emotional eating, which then leads to insomnia, and you have medication side effects, which all lead to obesity, which then leads to airway restriction, and therefore leads to sleep apnea. Or maybe it's chronic knee and back pain, And that's led to limited mobility, which led to weight gain, which now has led to sleep apnea. Listen, this isn't speculation. It's physiology. When you gain weight, tissue accumulates around the neck and upper airway, and it increases resistance and collapses the airway during your sleep. So by showing that your service-connected condition caused that weight gain, you've just created a clear pathway and a legally recognized pathway to connect sleep apnea secondarily. Most veterans have never heard of this, but it's one of the strongest legal arguments out there. What about chronic pain and sedentary lifestyle? So chronic pain isn't just physical. It changes the way you live. When you can't exercise, your metabolism slows, your sleep gets messed up and starts to fragment, and you rely more on medications like opioids or muscle relaxers, even Benadryl that depress breathing so you can sleep. That's a recipe for worsening sleep apnea. If your chronic pain or pain medication made your sleep apnea worse, that by definition is aggravation under the CFR 38. So document it. Show your doctor visits, your pain prescriptions, your physical therapy notes, and explain how those limitations led to inactivity, fatigue, and dependence on meds that suppress respiratory drive. That's how you prove aggravation, not speculation. And how about comorbid conditions, which are other conditions that can contribute? So finally, to understand that sleep apnea is rarely from just one thing. It rarely lives alone. It's usually part of a larger picture, like hypertension, diabetes, migraines, and heart disease. They all tie directly back to sleep apnea. Each of those can either result from or be aggravated by untreated sleep apnea. And when you prove that connection, you increase your combined rating and start to unlock potential, even SMC eligibility. For example, hypertension or high blood pressure leads to recurrent oxygen saturation triggers, and that causes sympathetic system and blood pressure to always chronically be elevated. What about diabetes? Okay, well, your poor sleep from sleep apnea can increase insulin resistance and metabolic dysfunction. How about heart disease? Well, if you're having a lot of apneic episodes at night, it puts your heart under constant stress and leads to right-sided failure or even arrhythmias. So don't stop at just one condition. Look at everything that it could be. Map out the network of cause and effect. That's how top-tier claims are built, with a medical narrative that's interconnected, evidence-driven, and bulletproof. When you master these advanced strategies, you move from being reactive to being strategic. You're not just fighting for a claim. You're constructing an airtight medical case that the VA can't poke holes in. Now, let's talk about something even more important than strategy, your mindset. Because you can't approach this like paperwork. This is a mission, and missions require persistence, planning, and purpose. The VA doesn't reward effort. It rewards evidence. You can write the best statement in the world, but if it's not backed by medical data, it's not going to hold up. On the other hand, a simple evidence-driven claim with the right nexus letter, DBQ, and lay witness support can change your life and your file. So when you're building your claim, think like a commander. Your job is to present a clear, chronological story that answers one question. Why is this service related? Here's how you do that. Start with the event or condition during service, like the exposure, the trauma, the physical strain, and then connect it to your diagnosis today using logic and evidence through your nexus letter, your medical literature, and your lay testimony, and then show the impact. How does it affect your functional status, your work, your relationships, your health, your sleep, your mental state? That's the story the VA needs to see. And here's the truth. This isn't just about winning benefits. It's about reclaiming your validation. For years, you've probably been told your sleep apnea is not related, or your fatigue was just normal, or that your snoring was just stress related, that your exhaustion was in your head. But here's the reality. It's not. It's a medical condition that started because of what you did and endured in uniform. And it deserves that recognition. So stay organized, stay factual, stay resilient, file your intent today, gather your evidence, and follow through until you hear the word approved, because you earned this. And now it's time to prove it. So I want to recap. What you need to do, remember, you need to have a formal diagnosis, right? You need to build your nexus or through a nexus letter, support it with a DBQ, and lay evidence or witness statement. Appeal smart, not emotional, and never quit. If you follow this blueprint, you can win your sleep apnea claim and finally get compensated for what you've been living with for years. If you're ready to get started, again, click the link below for a free consultation with our Xterra Health team. We'll help you review your records, do it for free, identify your best path to service connection, and guide you every step of the way. And in my next video, I'm breaking down and answering the question, how do I get rated for migraines or headaches? So if you want to see that, hit the like button, click subscribe, turn on notification, and as always, stay mission ready.